Hello, hello, and welcome to another podcast episode of Overpowering Emotions, where I talk all things big emotions, emotion regulation. Last week, I talked about the difference between emotions, affect, feelings, and mood. And today, I really want to focus a little more on affect because emotions are all felt in the body. I know it's a topic I've talked about a lot if you've listened to me, but I'm just looking at things at different angles and a little bit deeper. So, when we're looking at affect, if we really want to get very specific, it's sort of a summary of the body's internal states, right? What's happening inside our body. It's ongoing. It's shaped by inputs like blood sugar levels, hydration, circadian rhythms, pain signals, sympathetic activation, all of those types of things. So we all have this sort of internal resource body budget, right? The brain's job is to constantly regulate the body's internal systems. So it's monitoring our internal systems 24/7. It's managing resources like the glucose in our body, oxygen, water, all of those things. So affect is directly tied to our body's resources. It's sort of like the checkbook balance of our body's budget. A general feeling of pleasantness or unpleasantness, calmness or being worked up, all of that's a direct reflection of this body budget. So, affect really is sort of the background climate, and it's non-specific, right? It's just sort of the background climate. So, the brain, in monitoring everything that's going on, the brain has to explain it. And that's where emotion construction comes in, right? It's really this evolutionary function for survival, which sort of makes sense. So emotions aren't these random arbitrary experiences that we have. They are protective signals. That's why we have so many of the cues that we have to warn us about some internal or external cue. It's all about survival, right? That's why we have these experiences. So sometimes what appears to be an emotion might actually be the body in overdraft. Okay, so a drop in blood sugar, we know, creates unpleasant effect in the body. The brain might interpret that as frustration. It might interpret it as panic or sadness, depending on past experiences, depending on what's going on right now in the current context, and, whatever available emotion concepts that somebody has, depending on age and development and all of those sorts of things. But it's just that the body's resources are in deficit, right? Which is why we might start feeling anxious or angry without any obvious external trigger. And kids, I hear all the time saying, I feel really sad. I just don't know why. Nothing's happened. And then we're like, why? And like, I don't know. It could just be their body in this deficit. Right? We all know hangry, right? So if we have a kiddo who's cranky or if they're really distressed and there's no apparent external reason, internally, it could be that they didn't get enough sleep, so they're running on deficit. They didn't get enough to eat, they're running on deficit. They're dehydrated, they're running on deficit, right? So I'm always looking at those basic needs, making sure that those basic needs are addressed, because otherwise it's really hard to regulate our emotions, especially if our body is running in deficit. So I think we all get this, but it's really helpful to understand it and bring it to the forefront of mind. Because sometimes we do just need to give the kid a juice box. Or for you, if you're cranky all of a sudden, right? Maybe just having an apple. Actually, I would never give fruit juice. I would give water and then a snack, but we want to increase the blood glucose types of things. So this crankiness, when we're in that body deficit, it isn't an emotion, it's an effective signal that something about this internal state needs attention. There's not always something wrong. It's just the body's way of working a little bit harder to manage that deficit. And it can be really helpful because a lot of kids will say, like I said, they have no idea why. Drives my kiddos, my own kids nuts when I'm like, have some water, have a snack. I'm not hungry, I'm not thirsty, right? But we really want to start getting in tune and start noticing these things. Depression then really could be viewed as a sort of body bankruptcy or a metabolic sort of illness. So we always need to first consider that Maslow's hierarchy, right? I'm always talking about Maslow's hierarchy before we're jumping in, labeling feelings, assuming something else needs to be fixed. We always want to make sure those are being, were addressed because it could just be our physical state. So, like I said, it could just be a juice box that can make all the difference in the world, maybe some nuts, just depends. You're going to have to experiment and see what's going on. If we need that quick, glucose, then maybe that juice box will work. But we really want to make sure that we're giving the body what it needs. And we know that the brain uses most of the calories and it runs on glucose. So we want to make sure we're addressing that. Now, kids should really learn this, right? I like using the battery analogy because kids get that, especially if they're on iPads or cell phones or, they kind of understand that. So I made a kid-friendly version of this. You can check that out. I've got a video and you can share it with your kids, right? Share it with whomever to kind of watch this. But essentially, when we're fully charged, our brain has the resources to do what it needs to do to regulate our emotions, our attention, our behaviors. We can make good decisions. But when we're in that energy deficit, maybe because we didn't sleep, we didn't eat, could be that we're emotionally flooded, but whatever it is, our brain starts powering down some of those functions that aren't critical for survival, just like the iPad, right? So we can get kids to start think about what happens. I know when my battery on my phone starts to charge down, the screen starts to dim a bit, it gets a little darker. Certain apps start to crash. You probably aren't going to be streaming videos or doing video FaceTime, right? The device is going to work a little bit slower, might have trouble connecting. It switches to that low power mode until it suddenly just all of a sudden shuts down completely. Right? So, just like the iPad can't run games or videos when the battery's low, the brain can't do its best work. We can't make good decisions and focus and regulate our emotions, all of those types of things when we're running out of energy. So, what happens? Kids get reactive. They over respond. They cry. They shut down, even just over small little things, right? They're too sensitive, quote unquote. But it's because their body budget is in bankrupt. And here's where we really want to connect back to that emotion construction. The body sets the stage for emotions because before the brain even predicts what we're feeling, your body is already sending that signal to the brain. And those signals can be easily misread, especially because we're always, the brain's a prediction making machine, always looking out for danger 24/7. So if our body's low on resources, the brain's definitely going to misinterpret that as something is wrong. Danger. It's not going to wait around to see, oh, it's just because you're a little bit tired or because you're a little bit. No, it's going to say danger, survival. So we might label that sensation as anxiety or anger or sadness or whatever else because the physical sensation feels similar. And this is what we call affective misattribution, right? So, for example, a racing heart might feel like panic, right? If you're, and then you're going to say, oh, I'm anxious. But a racing heart could also be excitement if you're playing soccer, right? So the interpretation depends on the context around us right now and our body state. And your brain fills in the meaning, right? If we're not sure, it's going to fill in the gaps. And if there's a lot of uncertainty, it's always going to go to the fear. So it's sort of like this dashboard, warning light, right? It doesn't tell you exactly what's wrong. We don't know, right? Just when you're driving in a car, I always get this engine light. We don't know for sure what's wrong. It just tells you something needs attention. It's not an emotion yet. It's almost like a pre-emotion. But if we jump to emotions too soon when we're thirsty, right, we're going to say, oh my gosh, I'm anxious. And now I need to take a break and I need to do all of these things, which aren't helpful. A tired nervous system, that can get misinterpreted. I know when I get like 4 hours sleep, my chest is killing. It's the same thing for anxiety. Or maybe somebody else might interpret that as shame. So it's definitely something we want to think about, right? And that's why dropping into the body and really figuring out what's going on and thinking about, my day and have I eaten? Have I slept? Because when kids don't have emotional literacy, and this is part of it, it's really hard to differentiate physical states from emotional states, right? They're mislabeling those affective arousals as emotion or vice versa, right? A kiddo who's dehydrated or has that low blood sugar levels, right? They might just say, I feel weird or I feel sick, right? And now they're going home, they've got an upset tummy, but it's not really, they're not really in tune with what's going. But it could be, I feel weird and, oh, I'm scared. Even though there's no threat, it's just their body needs something. A teen might report anxiety when they're just overstimulated or tired or overstretched, right? Especially like I see that a lot. Overstretched cognitively, they're trying to write an essay and they're trying to study, right? An overheated room that could result in a lot of restlessness and it could be labeled as anger as kids start getting irritable, right? So we really need to start thinking about this. Affect is often very vague. Tense shoulders, stomach aches, racing heart, right? It's up to the brain to make meaning of all of those cues. So, this is really an area to target because it's not helpful if we start doing therapy or we start throwing all these interventions at kids who just need regular snacks throughout the day, right? So, we need to help them learn to decode some of those body affect signals first, because otherwise we're going to risk, mislabeling those physiological needs as emotional disorders, which is happening more and more. The worst thing that we can do is see a kid who reports feeling numb and low and diagnose them with depression without realizing they're not sleeping. They're scrolling TikTok late into the night. They're skipping breakfast in the morning. Their affective state, the low energy, the flat facial expressions, low motivation, it might seem like a mood disorder. Certainly, we want to look at that. But we also want to look at lifestyle because if we can get sleep improving, we get routine stabilized, we're getting regular meal times, circadian rhythm back on track, the energy returns, lo and behold, right? That low affect was a result of the physiological depletion, not clinical depression. So we really want to avoid pathologizing kids and jumping to conclusions when we're not looking at these underlying pieces. One I see a lot, are kids who are lashing out at recess. And of course, now adults are thinking that this kiddo has a short fuse, right? They've got emotion regulation problems. They're calling in the psychologist. But I can't tell you how many times kids come to school without eating breakfast in the morning. Or they're wearing a heavy hoodie outside. They're running around in the sun. They're getting overheated. Their affect is escalating, and their body, it's sending these arousal signals. It's interpreted as anger, right? Or they're just over emotional reactivity. So we really want to understand and normalize those body-based signals. We need to teach kids that emotions start in the body. And they have to start checking those physical states first. What is my body telling me right now? That's a great check in question. We want to build that interoception awareness, right? But we want to use things like body scan cards, using body budget visuals or battery levels. I like using the battery levels. Where's your battery at? Some sensory self-monitoring charts. How's my stomach, my muscles, my head, right? Just doing those body scans can be really helpful just to help them slow down and especially slow down emotion labeling, dropping into the body. That's why I'm always talking about dropping into the body. So if a kiddo says, I'm mad, well, what is your body doing? And what could all of the alternative explanations be? Your chest feels tight. That can happen with anger, but it can also happen with worries. It can also happen if we're rushed. It can also happen if you didn't get enough sleep. So let's get curious before we decide. Because that misattributed affect can become a problem, especially if kids are getting interventions and supports or breaks or accommodations for things that don't even help. And it often shows up before a full-blown dysregulation meltdown. So, teaching kids to notice and label those early body signals that build self-awareness, it builds regulation capacity. And we definitely want to integrate somatic awareness into any exposures that we do. If you're a therapist, or even if you're a parent, you're getting kids to do hard things. We want them to drop into their body. Prediction errors depend on the physiological signals being interpreted as safe enough to allow new learning. So if a child is mislabeling affect as danger, 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 it's undermining, the learning from exposure. So we're always assessing basic needs: sleep, hydration, hunger, screen time, regular routines. I'm always asking, are you waking up at the same time every day, even on weekends? Because if they're not, if they're sleeping in, I mean, that's a deficit. We're essentially jet lagging ourselves every weekend. And there's research showing people who wake up at different times, even just if it's just on the weekend, their brain kind of works the same way as shift workers' brains do, which is not great, right? So we really want to start looking at that. So whenever someone's reporting those high arousal feelings, let's take a look at the whole context. Because if it seems like anxiety or depression, it could be a body state in disguise. And that's going to help us prevent, like I said, over pathologizing, misdiagnosing mood and anxiety disorders. So accurate interpretation allows for better decisions. Eat a snack, get some rest before escalating into some emotional or behavioral dysregulation tantrum, right? And because that affect is tied to the body budget, promoting healthy habits is so important, right? It's so important for improving overall mood. We're just in a better state of mind, better able to regulate our emotions, better able to interpret situations when we're well slept, well fed. And so it affects the resilience and our reactions to even when unpleasant situations happen and unpleasant emotions do come up, we're able to respond better. So there's no point trying to work on strategies if kids aren't getting that consistent quality sleep. That's sort of the foundation. Poor sleep makes everything worse. We also need, I haven't talked about regular movement, exercise. That positively shifts affect as well, positively affects our ability to regulate our emotions and manage challenges as they come up, right? So that's really helpful. It helps diminish that internal distress. And it changed the sensory state of the body as well. Eating real food, focusing on good nutrition, that supports metabolic processes that underpin the body budget. We know dehydration increases cortisol in the body, right? And that can make us feel really anxious or stressed. So drinking lots of fluids throughout the day is really important. And of course, our nervous systems are co-regulated. Being around trusted adults, trusted people that we feel like we belong and we're safe with, that actually provides a lot of savings to the body budget as well. It reduces some of those metabolic taxes, so to speak. So that's important, feeling like I belong, that I'm part of the community, right? With my friends, with my peers, in my class, with my family. Even just things like kindness, that really provides a lot of body budgeting benefit. How can we show more kindness to the kids in our lives? That can be really helpful too. I am going to be talking about getting really granular with emotions, but I wanted to first talk about the physical feelings and the affect in this body budget because we're not just labeling feelings. We got to get very specific. And that's going to help shape the experience itself and give us more of a specific roadmap as to exactly what is it that I need to do when emotions come up. But we want to make sure we're labeling things properly. So the next time a kiddo feels overwhelmed or they seem overwhelmed or dysregulated or stuck, always check body signals first because oftentimes emotion regulation doesn't actually begin with managing big feelings. It's about translating those vague body clues into clear messages, right? From there, then we can help kids respond with insight instead of reactive sort of instinct. When we start with affect before it becomes the emotion, we're giving kids the language to notice their own body signals. They're able to increase their self-awareness, their interoceptive awareness, self-monitoring. And over time, that builds trust in their body, trust in themselves. Like I said, I made a quick little video you can share with kids, so definitely check that out as well, just with the understanding the battery budget piece. But I will leave it there for today. Lots to think about. Hopefully, you had a couple of aha moments. Hope it was helpful. If it was, definitely share it. Go and rate me on Apple Podcasts so other people can find it as well. Have a great day. Help those kiddos be bold and courageous, and I will see you next time.